Hello, everybody, and just a quick warning for this episode. Something went kind of weird with my mic, so headphone users beware a little bit. It was really loud, so I tried to sort of in the post editing here tone it down a little bit, but it still sounds a little weird because it was peaking, meaning that like it was sort of too loud for the mic to handle and compress properly. So my mic sounds a little bit weird, but hopefully it's not too obnoxious for you to listen to the episode and not too intrusive. So hopefully you enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 112 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin. And Gavin, have you ever gotten to do something just because you were a man?
I mean, I'm sure yes. Like, I'm positive that's true, but I can't think of something off the top of my head.
So this weekend, I'm going to Montreal, and the reason I'm going to Montreal is because at the school I go to, the French teacher is taking a bunch of her French kids up to Montreal. And you see where this is going.
Yeah.
And in October, she asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, I don't speak French. What's wrong? And she's like, you don't need to speak French. We kind of just need a male teacher to go with us to say yes. So I get a free trip to Montreal, just simply by being a male working at a high school. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty sweet.
Men in their 20s have kind of needed a win recently, and I'm happy to provide. I'm happy to provide that for my people.
Oh, thanks, buddy. No, I can remember this one time. So I was in RA in the dorms in high school. So for anybody, if you happen to have not, gone to college or lived in dorms, that's basically the person who, like another student. So it's not like they have any real authority over anybody, who is paid to be like the slightly cooler hall monitor in the dorms.
Yeah, that's about right.
And so I did that so I did college for 5 years, and for 3.5 of them, I was an RA. So my first semester at Cortland, so I did community college for 2 years and then transferred to SUNY Cortland. My first semester as an RA there, I was on duty. So like we have to sit down in the office like one night a week or depends on, building to building. But and the person that I was on duty with was this like smaller non-binary human. And, I'm not a big person. I wouldn't call myself that, but I'm not a small person either.
You're a rather average-sized human being.
Yeah, well, I'm tall, and granted, the beard was much shorter at the time, but I'm a very like masculine presenting person. And so this person comes down who was from this other RA's floor, and was like, so some guy just showed up and started trying to beat up my boyfriend. And so the other RA just kind of looks at me, and I'm like, yes, I will come with you. Turned out one of the best RA stories of my life. It was wonderful. It involved just somebody like stumbling into the wrong room, and then upon seeing people who are not his roommates in what he thought was his room, he started trying to beat them up. But it turns out what the girlfriend who came down to like the RA desk didn't tell us was that her boyfriend's an MMA fighter. And so clearly a drunk freshman is doing nothing to this guy.
Nope.
So by the time we got up there, the drunk guy was on the floor, like not hurt, but he was certainly not going anywhere. Like being held down as painlessly as possible by MMA boyfriend. And obviously, as soon as we heard that there was like a fight thing, like on the way up to their floor, I called like the campus police, and turns out, like I said, it was like the exact same suite location on the floor, but just like one floor away from where he actually lived. So like if you're like real drunk after like a big party or something, an understandable mistake to make. But yeah, just and there's many more series of events, but alas, maybe that's a story for another podcast.
I'm sure we'll be able to. Maybe we need to have one of our half episodes one time, and you can just tell RA stories, which I would be all for.
Absolutely. I have many. God, what a time.
we will cover that in due course. But until then, Gavin, we have some housekeeping.
We sure do. So, please do not forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and make sure to follow us on all of our social medias. That is, the Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, is to give us some kind of feedback about the show and suggest any future topics you might like to hear. Last episode, I mentioned something about Blue Sky, which is a Twitter competitor, not understanding that you needed like an invite link from somebody who's currently on the platform, and I don't know people. So as of this recording, we do not have a Blue Sky account, but I can put out some feelers and see if I can make that happen. And it will become clear in a few minutes once we get into the actual content of the episode, the main topic, why I haven't been able to, because I'm sure that I know people who have accounts, but my life has been real busy, which is why I wrote this episode today. But yeah, so like I said, follow us on all the social media stuff, and if you would like to be a guest on the show, make sure to fill out a guest form that we have, just a simple Google form down in the show notes. And last week I did not mention what this week's topic was. I said I was going to edit it in, and then didn't. But next week we are going to be talking about the Cretaceous period, following our series as we march through the geologic periods and different sections of Earth's history. We're going to be talking about the Cretaceous period, the last period when the non-bird dinosaurs were around, and what is probably the most famous mass extinction among people who are not paleontologists. So super excited for that one. Today, since I don't think we've actually said it yet in the episode, we're talking about cats.
Cats.
I love cats, just weird little guys. But there's a reason why we're talking about cats. I try not to do, back-to-back episodes with like similar themes. Last episode we talked about cephalopods. That is one particular group of life. So I try not to have like the next episode be about just another group of life. But there's a particular reason that I will get to after Today in History. What do you got for us, Mike?
So, as I told Gavin when we were getting started today, today in history, I couldn't find a whole lot good going on. But so in 1970, an anonymous buyer purchased one of the pairs of ruby slippers awarded by Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz for $15,000. And instead of just keeping them on a shelf somewhere or in a closet, that person donated them to the Smithsonian Institute, where you can go and see them today. So, yeah. Rich person.
How much was it and what year was it?
So $15,000 in 1970. Are you doing an inflation conversion right now?
I sure am.
Gavin, this is why I love you. All right, what do we got? $15,000 in 1970 translates to?
A little over $120,000.
120 grand for a pair of ruby slippers. Actually, to be honest, that's not bad.
That's less than I thought. Yeah,
it's less than I would have thought. And now they are they're on display at the Smithsonian, as well they should, for a national treasure of a movie
sweet,
like that.
Yeah.
So well done to I don't know if philanthropist is quite the right word, but an altruistic rich person, I guess.
Yeah, a rich person not currently actively trying to ruin something.
Well, they're also probably dead at this point, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, true.
Yep.
Oh well.
All right, Gavin. So that was Today in History. Let's do cats.
Yeah. So cats. One of the most familiar groups of animals, I think, to most people. Although, as I learned, Mike never had a cat growing up, which is going to make this episode less easy for me, because Mike will not be as familiar with cats as I believe most people probably are.
Not at all.
He actually just learned last year that you're allergic to them.
Don't enjoy it.
So, yeah. But what caused me to do this episode this week is that we are currently fostering 4 baby kittens. And not just like baby, like fresh, very fresh kittens.
How did you guys sign up for this, or what was the?
Yes. Yep. So Liz, my wife, has a background in taking care of animals and stuff, and we fostered a lot when we were in California through her job because she worked as an animal control officer for the county that we lived in,
Mm-hmm.
and out in California they have like that's like integrated into like the local shelter, whereas out there they don't really have like SPCA as like a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here in Pennsylvania, where we live now, the SPCA is like a separate entity that receives like some state funding, but is not like state or municipality or county run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so they receive money from the government, but it's operated independently.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So she basically just signed up to be a foster because she's currently not working. And there was one Friday where I came home and I had taken her car to work that day. And when I got home, my car that I had left here was in a different parking spot. And I was like, because like she, not that I like care that my wife goes and does stuff during the day, whatever.
Yeah, Liz, why are you leaving the house?
Well, especially there's the reason why it was like noticeable was because my car shouldn't be driving right now. The registration there's some complicated stuff between like interstate car stuff. But anyway, I did not expect my car to have moved that day.
Okay.
So when I got in the house, I was like, "Hey, did like you have to move the car for something?" And I hear her just from another room, and she's like, "No." And I come in the bedroom, and she's laying in the bed, and just sitting on her lap are these 2 one-day-old kittens.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so for reference, when you adopt a kitten, like typically like the earliest you adopt a kitten at is like 8 weeks.
Right. That was always my understanding, was you wait a couple of weeks.
Well, not just a couple weeks, a couple months.
Yeah. Actually, okay.
And so they were literally a day old. And so that was a Friday. And when they're that young, you have to feed them every 2 hours.
Wow.
Including like overnight and stuff. So luckily Liz is very gracious and is not like, you're getting up with me every time. She's like, if this was your child, obviously, yeah, I would get up and help. But she's like, I did this without asking you, so like, or even like telling you, so this one's on me. So we did that for a week, and then by the end of the week, they were able to go every like 3 or 4 hours or so. But the following Friday, so now the kittens are 1 week old, she gets a call from the shelter, and it's like, hey, we have 2 more kittens without a mom who were born literally like 2 hours ago.
Wow.
She was like, yeah. She was like, what difference is 2 more going to make? I have to get up so often anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And so she said yes?
Oh, yeah. But this time she did call me and was like, hey, are you cool with this?
Now, are the kittens like adorable and like fun?
Oh, they are so cute.
Okay.
In fact, I've been slacking on social media things. I'll post some pictures to the social media in celebration of this episode because they are so darn cute.
Should make it like the cover art for this episode if we know how to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if our platform has a way to do that. I'll look into it.
Fair enough. All right, so that's your cats. But let's talk about just cats, capital C.
Yes, absolutely. So, cats, or scientifically, the family Felidae, are a weird group, like I mentioned, to sort of describe because most people, Mike excluded, are so familiar with them. So it feels weird to describe what a cat is, but I guess not to Mike. So that's in this sense, it's actually a little helpful to me. And just a little sort of terminology up front. When I say cats in this episode, I'm talking about the whole family. If I mean domestic cats, I'll say domestic cats. So there was a little bit of confusion. I know some of the folks that listen to the podcast, like some of Liz's family in the cows episode, about some of the terminology about cows. So trying to avoid that. But one of the really nice things about trying to describe cats is that they're what we call very conserved, which means the ones that aren't very closely related are still really, really similar to each other.
The ones that aren't closely related are very similar to each other.
Right. So it means they're
Okay.
all of them are very similar. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so for the most part, pretty much everything I say is like a general rule. If there's like a glaring exception to some of the like features or something that I mentioned, I'll point it out. But for the most part,
Okay.
uh, you know, everything from a tiger to your house cat are very very similar. Um, so if you can picture a domestic cat in your mind, that's more or less what all other cats sort of look like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which
But there's no
is a
surprises
fun.
that we're talking about here.
There'll be a couple, but not really. No.
Okay.
Um, and I also just like pointing out that this is not always the case for things in the same family, which is why like above species level, it's all kind of arbitrary. What we call a
Okay.
family, what we call a subfamily. You know, we've talked about this at length. We've had episodes about how taxonomy works and how it, at the end of the day, fundamentally is kind of arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
But um, so, for example, like I said, all of these cats from a tiger to a house cat, almost exactly the same, just different sizes, slightly different body proportions. Whereas then you look at things like a bison and a little gazelle, which are in
Mm-hmm.
the same family, but are wildly different. So
Right.
and that's the same sort of taxonomic levels that we're talking about here. So just
Mm-hmm.
sort of as a reference, cats super similar to each other. The whole family, though, these days in the modern world, are made up of 41 living species that are nearly all over the world, with a couple of exceptions. There are no
Okay.
native cats, and I'll circle around to the native part,
Mm-hmm.
to like the very high Arctic in places like Canada, Greenland. In Scandinavia, there are some cats, but not in like the very northern coast parts, like northern Russia as well. Um, then like there's this kind of just random stretch from like eastern Ukraine through part of Russia and into Kazakhstan, where there's
Mm-hmm.
just no cats for some reason. All
How long has
around
that been
them,
the case
there's
for?
cats. Um, I don't know.
Hmm.
That particular, I'd be shocked if there weren't some in the past.
Right.
Given, as we'll talk about their fossil history, cats have
Their
a very,
ubiquity.
very
Yeah.
long fossil history in like, central Eurasia. Um, but yeah, just this really random where there's no kind of native cat there at all, not even like lynx or other things like that. Um, and then lots of islands. There are very few like island cats, so there are no native cats to the Caribbean islands really. Japan, despite how you know large and popular cats are in sort of their pop culture in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Places like Madagascar and then all greater Australia, sort of the Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, no cats.
No
And
cats.
here is the obligatory PSA about being a scientist when talking about domestic cats, and now in this case, keep your cats inside. Cats are
You're
really bad for the environment, particularly on those
talking about
islands.
domestic cats here, I assume?
Yes, keep your
Okay.
domestic cats inside. Um,
Keep your,
Cats kill.
leopards, they can stay outside.
Yeah, sure. Uh, but yeah, domestic cats kill like millions and millions of birds. Like if someone told me like domestic cats kill 10 million birds a year, I'd be like, that sounds like an underestimate.
Really?
Well, given how many there are in the world,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so they're really bad for the environment. And for example, I believe where I currently live, there are supposed to be only two species of native cat. I don't believe neither of which actually currently live here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But mountain lions and bobcats. Bobcats probably still do live around here, but um, and a bobcat is not huge, but certainly bigger than a house cat. So it's like
Right.
the things that house cats eat aren't usually being hunted by cats. Aren't supposed to be eaten by cats their size here in Eastern North America. So they don't belong out in the world. The only place where that's like not the case for domestic cats is depending on where they were domesticated from, likely like northern Africa, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
But PSA, keep your cats inside. Be a good person. But moving on from that, like I said, 41 species, and they range in size from the tiger, which is the largest cat around today, which is about 10 feet long, including the tail, and
Tiger's
somewhere in the
bigger than a lion?
ballpark. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, if you saw them next to each other, they'd be functionally the same, realistically.
Is it bigger based on weight?
Yeah, tigers tend to be stockier than lions do.
Okay.
But yeah, tigers can get up to also in the ballpark of 550 pounds for like a big adult male. On the other side of the spectrum here, there's the rusty spotted cat at 1 to 1.5 feet and 2 to 3 pounds. And for reference, domestic cats are somewhere around 10 pounds, usually.
How many pounds was this?
2 to 3.
Wow.
Yeah, real tiny guys. And as I mentioned earlier, despite the rusty spotted cat being literally hundreds of times smaller than a tiger, if you were to look at their skeletons, one next to each other, it literally just looks like you grabbed the corner in Photoshop and dragged it down. That's really what it looks like, which there are very few cases where that's actually true. Obviously, things like the bones are like relatively thicker to be able to support more weight, but it's like almost all the features are in the same places and do the same things. Talking about the different varieties of cats we have around today, they're generally split into two larger groups. The first one is the pantherine cats, which are your quote-unquote big cats. There are 2 genera and 7 species of these generally larger cats. There's the genus, and I'm not going to go through every species for all of them because there's a lot, but for the pantherines, they're like big, charismatic. Most people know what you're talking about. So in the genus Panthera, there are the leopards and lions in Africa, the jaguar in Central and South America that occasionally gets up into very southern North America as well. And then in Asia, you have the tiger and the snow leopard. So that's all in the same genus. And then there's the genus Neofelis, which there are 2 species of clouded leopards around the Himalayas and down into like Sumatra and Borneo in Southeast Asia. So if you notice, all of those are old world, except for the jaguar, which is just kind of in the middle of the Americas. And notice there are also some pretty big cats that are not in the quote-unquote big cats. For example, mountain lions are not in this group. Cheetahs are not in this group. They are in the other group, the other of the living subfamilies, the felinae, which is basically just the rest of the cats. Again, not going through every species, but because there are so many more, there are sort of some more subdivisions here in this subfamily. So there are the bay cats of Southeast Asia. And as I'm going through these, just sort of keep in mind the geography, because that comes into play when we're talking about their evolution. So all of the big cats, except for one, are in, Afro-Eurasia.
Okay.
There are, getting back into the felines, there's the bay cats in Southeast Asia, the caracals in Africa and the Middle East. This group includes the caracal and the serval, which are somewhat popular in the pet trade. They are just kind of very tall cats with long legs. These are some of the most different looking cats, mostly just because their legs are a lot longer. And servals have like a really pretty coat that is sort of yellow and black like a leopard, but instead of the spots of a leopard, it has stripes. So really pretty. Not surprised that they are like in the pet trade a decent amount.
Yeah.
There is the genus Leopardus, which are not leopards. But
why not? Why not?
I don't know. And that's something that came up when I was doing the research for the fossil species. We can't give cats good names. The good scientific names. We just can't. And I don't know why.
Who is we in this scenario? Like, who's the governing body on this?
Technically, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature. But it's the people who first named the species. So for a lot of these, it was probably somebody like the early 1800s, where it's like, oh, leopards are big and spotted and yellow. This genus is actually, this doesn't even make sense because leopards are in Africa, and this genus Leopardus is completely in South America.
Jeez. Okay.
So, yeah. But I will have a particular name to name when we talk about the fossils because that one bothered me. But yeah,
I would say I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually going to hate it, but okay.
Oh, you are, because it actually references a previous episode.
Jeez.
So, yes, genus Leopardus in South America. That includes the ocelot, which is very cute. Looks like a leopard, but much smaller and cuter. Let's see, we have the lynxes and bobcats in the northern hemisphere. So they are in North America and Eurasia. We have the pumas, which include mountain lions in the Americas, and cheetahs in Africa and Asia. And we have the leopard cats, not leopards, not the genus Leopardus, but generally are really, really small cats in Asia.
Jeez. Okay.
Yep. And I believe that group includes that rusty spotted cat. And lastly, we have the genus Felis, which includes domestic cats and lots of other small, similar cats found all throughout Africa, Europe, and Asia. And then, as mostly happens here, when we talk about groups of animals that are still living today, we talk a little bit about their conservation, and in general, cats aren't doing great, particularly the big ones.
Is that hunting? Is that climate change? Like what's causing that?
Mostly habitat destruction. So, for example, with tigers are like the most endangered cat, I believe. And that is a combination of, farmers don't want big predators around, so if they see a tiger, they'll kill it. Okay. And then also, they need big forests to be able to, have a big enough range to get enough food and for enough of their food to live in. And as people are cutting down more and more forest across the world, that makes it so there's less and less, herbivorous animals around, so there's less food for the cats. So all of the pantherines, so all of the big cats, except for the jaguar, are listed as vulnerable, which is the step above endangered, and then tigers are like endangered. Cheetahs cheetahs are listed as vulnerable. There's not a lot of good data on some of the smaller cats just because they're smaller and harder to find and measure and stuff. But cheetahs are listed as vulnerable. They're not doing great. I remember hearing a couple of years ago about how their genetic diversity is really bad. As well as mountain lions are listed as near threatened, which is sort of the step above vulnerable. But that's largely thanks to the fact that mountain lions live basically all the way from southern South America to like central Canada. So they just have an enormous range. And so in places like South America and Central America, where there's lots of forest and lots of mountains that are less developed, that they have good populations down there. Whereas they're supposed to be, their native population is basically all of North America, but it is fairly uncommon to have like a good sized breeding population east of the Rocky Mountains in North America.
For cats or for anything?
For mountain lions specifically.
Okay. Why is that?
Because we killed them all.
Yeah, we have a tendency to do that.
And like, believe me, there's enough deer for them. I grew up in New York, and you'd hear every now and then about one being in the Adirondacks, and I'd be surprised if there wasn't a handful around the Adirondacks, and there's definitely like the food supply for them, but it's mostly people not wanting them around. In that case, with mountain lions there. So cats in general not doing great. And however, domestic cats doing fantastic. They are everywhere. There are too many of them. Keep your cats inside. So that is cat diversity. So let's talk a bit about what cats are after talking about some of the different species there. So cats are obligate carnivores, meaning that they must eat meat of some kind as like the vast majority, in the case of cats, of their diet. Whereas you think of dogs, sometimes, if you let them outside in the yard, they'll just start eating grass because their stomach hurts. Cats are much less likely to do that. Wolves and things eat much more, plant material than you would think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas wild cats kind of don't. And especially because their teeth are really bad for that.
Okay.
Everything about them is like precision engineered to just be full of knives and death. So that's why domestic cats are so good at killing so many birds. So let's sort of start at the front and work our way backwards. Cats have very long and sensitive whiskers all over their face, like from their eyebrows, coming forward off the face, coming to the side off the face. And that's mostly because a lot of them are really good nocturnal predators. Not all of them, but a lot of them have sort of cat's eye pupil shape where it's like diamond shaped. So it's like during the day, it'll be like a vertical slit because it's too bright. And then at night, it gets nice and wide to be able to let more light in. And the whiskers just help them feel around when they're hunting in the dark.
Huh, okay.
Speaking of their eyes are enormous compared to other predators like dogs or bears or stuff like that. And their ears also are huge relative to other predators of like a similar size. However, their sense of smell is not nearly as good as something like a dog or a bear. And you can tell that just sort of looking at their skull. If you ever looked at a cat's skull, it is very short compared to a dog. They don't have that like nice long muzzle that a dog does. And their eye sockets just take up a huge portion of their skull.
Okay.
Their mouths are just chock full of blades. So if you ever played with a cat, you probably know that. Yeah. So they basically have lost or greatly reduced all of their teeth that are not blades. All carnivorans, so that is sort of the mammal predators, is dogs, bears, raccoons, cats, hyenas, weasels, seals. All of them have what are called carnassial teeth.
That's a
which
fun
are
word.
It's very fun. Well, not fun if you're getting chewed on.
Well, okay.
But so these teeth so it's the upper third premolar and the lower first molar, and they are blade shaped specifically for cutting meat. So for example, if you've ever given a dog a bone and like puts it at the back of its mouth to chomp on it, it's using those teeth.
Okay.
And so in cats, these carnassials are very, very sharp, and basically all the other molars and premolars are either greatly reduced or are just gone.
Wow.
Plus,
wow.
Yeah, which isn't uncommon for animals to lose teeth. For example, the default mammal teeth pattern, dental formula is what it's called, is to have 4 premolars. Humans only have 2. Primates in general only have 2. So it's like we've gotten rid of a bunch of teeth too, but we just did it for a very different reason. And so with cats, also their canine teeth are very sharp and very large, much more than dogs. So I've always been like, why are they called canine teeth and not feline teeth? Riddle me that.
It sounds like everything revolving names with these guys kind of sucks.
It really does. It really does. And we'll talk more about those canine teeth in some of our extinct groups. Spoilers.
Okay.
Also, a fun thing, since I said we're starting at the front and working back, I didn't know this, but I guess cats lack a sweetness taste receptor.
That's weird.
I think it just goes to show how hardcore these guys are. It's like, I don't want anything sweet. My body is a hardened killing machine. My body is a temple. No sugar
Something
for
along
me.
those lines.
Yeah. Cats very famously have protractable claws. You'll often hear them called retractable, but that's not accurate. So they are protractable because sort of the retracted position is when they're sort of not out. When they're in, they have like a little sheath in their paw that they can retract it into. But because that is the default position, is when it's retracted. So they are protractable because they have to use muscles to protract them out.
Okay.
So because this is a science podcast, terminology is important in science. They are protractable claws. And so they do this in order to keep them sharp, because when they're hunting, they use their claws a lot more than, say, a dog does. Dogs will mostly just like chase down their prey until the prey is tired and exhausted and can't run anymore. Whereas cats, they get close and then pounce and wrestle it using their claws to hang on. With the exception of the cheetah. That is the only one that I know of that has their front claws just out all the time, because they use them for running.
Their claws are out all the time?
Yep. They use them to get traction for running as like cleats, basically.
Okay.
With the little exception that they actually have their thumb claw, or dew claw, as it's called. And that is still really sharp. Cats can't retract, or I guess protract that anyway. That one is always out by default, but that one's not touching the ground in cheetahs, so that one's still nice and sharp, that they use to grab onto their prey with their thumbs, basically. Let's see. So their claws also grow in a really interesting way. So most mammals, if you think of like your fingernails, we had a whole episode about claws and nails and stuff. But if you look at your nails, most mammals sort of grow their nails like you do, where it just sort of grows out and is usually just worn down from using it to walk or scratch or stuff or whatever. Like in, a dog living out in the wild, you don't have to trim their nails because they wear them down by running and chasing stuff. In cats, because they keep them so protected, they would never really get worn down on purpose. You wouldn't want them to be worn down like that. So they had to figure out a different way to be able to, get rid of extra claw that they're not using. And so they basically shed the outer layer of their claws periodically to make sure that they are sharp. And that's why they use things like scratching posts, and why they scratch up your couch and things like that.
And that's how it gets, run down?
So it doesn't wear them. It sort of peels them, almost.
Okay.
Like I said,
I'll take it.
Yeah, if you've ever had a cat, and I know, Mike, you have not.
I have not.
You will find like little claw-shaped flakes, almost. So it basically peels, like a banana almost, revealing like a new layer of the keratin claw material that is nice and fresh and sharp. So they will, just like something sheds its skin, like a reptile sheds its skin or something to keep it fresh, they will shed their claws every now and then. And then also another PSA about domestic cats: do not declaw your cats. We had a PSA about this in that claws episode.
Right.
When you declaw a cat, you literally rip off the first like knuckle in their hand.
Not good. Not fun. Don't do that.
No, not good. And it still blows my mind every day, or at least every day that I think about it. That like this is something that vets did in the past and were totally fine with doing.
Ugh.
When it's like, I believe that's like a torture method in humans.
Yeah, yeah. Ugh.
So, yeah, don't declaw your cats. Let's see, a couple more features here. Cats famously can purr. A very unique vocalization that is unique to cats, as well as one very closely related family that there's only a couple of species in called civets. We don't really know how they do it.
How they purr?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, it's hard to make it happen in a dead cat. To cut it open, it's not going to purr if it's like on an operating table. So it's kind of tough to see it happen in real time. And so there are a few different hypotheses depending on where you look. So I'm not going to go into it. There's some really deep like anatomy stuff. So I think it has to do with part of the hyoid, which is the partial bone, partial cartilage that helps control the tongue. That's like sort of in your throat. It's actually part of what makes up like the Adam's apple. Again, total, it's kind of a whole complex, but it depends on like how much bone it is and how much cartilage it is. If it's less bony, you can vibrate cartilage more than you can, and then like flex cartilage more than you can bone. So I believe that's one hypothesis, but that's just a brief reading that I did. So I had also heard in the past that while most cats can purr, some of the big cats can't, but can roar instead, which is different. But also, depending on what source you look at, this is or is not true. I read some things that said that the big cats, like basically if it can roar, that it can't purr at all. Others that I read said that they can, but they only purr in relation to like some mating related things. Unsure.
Are they like related? Like, are those like, I think of purring and roaring as being two very different things, but are they actually like, similar to each other at all?
They similar in that they use the vocal cords, I guess.
Okay.
But that's pretty much it. But again, it's just like if it's more ossified, so more bone, that makes it like sturdier and sturdy enough to be able to support roaring without ripping itself apart. At least that's how I understand it, at least.
Gotcha.
Couple more things. Cats have the most diverse fur pattern, full fur coloration of any. There's a lot of caveats here, but of any terrestrial, mammalian, carnivore. I would argue of all mammals, except for maybe the rodents, just because there are so many of them. They lack a real clavicle, which is your collarbone. So they have the bone, but it's not really connected to anything, which lets them be more flexible in their shoulders at the cost of like structural support of your arms. They have extremely flexible spines in order to like twist and contort and chase their prey. And they have very long tails. There are very few things with tails as long as cats, at least when it comes to their closer carnivorous relatives. Their tails are somewhere between a third and half of their body length. Whereas if you think of like a dog, it's at most like a third.
The tail length in relation to body size?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is just a general description of cats. And so now we get into some of the fossils. And I want to be a little upfront. Cats generally don't leave great fossils.
That seems weird. Why is that?
So, while I mentioned and have talked more about the big cats so far, that is the minority of cats. That is 7 out of the 41 living species. So, one, small things don't tend to fossilize very well. And two, cats tend to live in places that don't fossilize very well. Mountains don't tend to leave good fossils, so it's like things like snow leopards, really bad fossil record just because they live way up high in the mountains. They also tend to live in places like forests. So forests, because they are really good at it's called turnover. So it's like when something dies, it just quickly gets, turned back into nutrients for the forest to use. So when that happens, they don't become fossils. Things need to get buried pretty quickly after it dies in order to become a fossil. So being in a desert is really good for becoming a fossil. But there are some desert cats, but not a ton. And particularly for some of the early cats. So not great fossil record, but we do have some. And so, going back to where did cats come from? What were their ancestors like? So,
like, is this a mommy, daddy cat? Like, had a, like, is that one of those conversations?
A little bit.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned earlier, talking about some of the, just comparing them to other things, felids, so cats, are in the order Carnivora, the carnivorous mammals. And the first carnivorans were a family called the Myacidae. And that name's not particularly important, but this group basically looked very weasel-like with these like really long bodies and relatively short limbs that mostly lived in the trees and stuff. And so they were basically started showing up basically right after the dinosaurs went extinct. So this is around 65, 66 million years ago. In that ballpark is when these guys first show up. So these are not quite cats, but as we'll see, we get more cat-like as we go.
More cat-like as we go. That would be a good name for an album.
I was trying to come up with a quick, like a Cats musical pun.
It would have went over my head, so I'm glad you didn't.
Well, it's like I've never even seen the show because I don't care.
Yep, me neither.
Or the movie because I heard that was just nightmare fuel. But yeah, so this other family, the Myacids, show up basically right after the dinosaurs go extinct, and then a little bit later on so that's in the Paleocene epoch, a little bit later in the Eocene epoch, so this is around 40 million years ago, the two living groups of carnivorans split. One is the caniforms, and the other one is the feliforms, the dog-shaped ones and the cat-shaped ones.
Mm-hmm.
So caniforms include your dogs, bears, raccoons, weasels, otters, seals and sea lions, and a couple of extinct groups that aren't important to our topic today. The feliforms include cats, hyenas, civets, which are, like I said, sort of the closest living relatives to cats. They're sort of like long tree cats, almost. A group called linsangs, which again are very similar to cats, but are kind of different. I'm unsure how. Didn't do too much research into those. There's like 2 species today. Also includes meerkats and mongooses are in here. And a couple of extinct groups that are important to today's topic called the nimravids and the barbarophilids. We'll talk more about them later, so keep those two in your brain. So at this point in the timeline, we're at 40 million years ago, and the dog group and the cat group split off to do their own things. Then a very, very short time after that, the group that includes cats themselves split off from all of their other relatives, like the hyenas and the mongooses and stuff like that. So cats are on their own trajectory somewhere around like 38, 35 million years ago.
38 to 35 million years ago. Okay.
And by this point, they would still look pretty similar to those Myacids, just like the long tree cat things. And like I said, very short time after that, cats started doing their own thing. Around 30 million years ago, the first true cats show up. So things that we would say, this is for sure a cat.
Would it like scientists would say that, or me, big dumb would look at it and be like, it's a cat?
Yeah, I would say most people would probably be like, yeah, that looks pretty cat-like.
Okay.
I haven't seen, a full skeleton of this particular species. But looking at the skull, I'd be able to be like, I wouldn't know where else to put it. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
But yeah, so there is, like I said, the first true cat shows up, and it's a genus called Proailurus. And here's where I'm going to rant a little bit about the names being stupid.
Here we go.
So, side note about the sort of, I guess, suffix here, ailurus. You'll hear this word a bunch of times if you ever look into, like, extinct cats. And usually, when you have a genus with, like, pro or hespero in front of it as the prefix, it's referencing, like, a previously named genus that occurs later in time. So, for example, one of the earliest dogs is called Hesperocyon. That means, like, dawn dog or early dog.
That seems
There's
to make
another
sense.
genus, right? There's another genus that is, like, slightly older called Pro-Hesperocyon because it's a little earlier.
Also, seem okay. I'm with you so far.
You would think that Proailurus, this cat here, this earliest cat that we know of, is an ancestor of the genus Ailurus. But no, that is not the case. That would be too simple. Ailurus is the genus of red pandas.
All right.
And, I could kind of forgive it if, like, early scientists didn't really know what they were doing. And we're like, red panda's a cat, I guess. But no, this thing was named in, like, the mid-1800s.
People should know better.
It's like, they should know better. And also, Ailurus is ancient Greek for cat. So, why did they use it for red pandas, which are not related closely to cats at all? They are
Is there a story here, or
related.
is this just a no one knows?
There's a little bit of a story, but not an interesting one. Red pandas are, like, closer related-ish to raccoons. So they're on the complete other side of the carnivoran family tree. However, as I mentioned earlier, the other side was going to be referencing an earlier episode 103, about George Cuvier. He did not name red pandas this. His brother did.
Did we talk about his brother? Did he have a brother?
No, not at all. But apparently his brother did stuff too. I don't know.
Okay, what's his brother's name?
I don't care.
Wow.
So
Tell you what.
It was.
you know you're the younger brother when.
Yeah, right. I believe it was, like, they're very French names. I think it was, like, something Frédéric Cuvier.
Okay.
But if you want to hear about that racist, go listen to episode 103. Anywho, digression aside about how some of the names are stupid, Proailurus shows up in the middle Oligocene of Eurasia. So, like I said, at this point, somewhere around 30 million years ago. And there are fossils from around this time known from Germany, Spain, and Mongolia, so kind of all over Eurasia. There is a really similar specimen from around this time in North America as well. That is kind of suspect to me. That they, call it Proailurus, because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Just based on, like, how I understand their, like, biogeography. But I thought I'd throw it in here because you might see it if you decide to do some of your own research. But by a bit after this, it's closer in the ballpark of 20 million years ago, the same genus was for sure in North America and kind of all around, at least Eurasia and parts of North America. But these first cats to make it to North America were beaten to the punch of North America by about 20 million years.
Oh?
By an extremely similar group that I mentioned earlier called the Nimravids. Nimravids, while not being cats, or even particularly closely related, they're sort of on the same side of the carnivorans, so they're closer to cats than to like dogs,
Right.
but not closely related at all. They look extremely similar, even like their bones. Like if I would be very hard pressed to find the differences if you were to just give me a random fossil cat skull and a Nimravid skull. I would have a hard time telling which one's which.
Is that just because you're not like an expert in this one very specific field, or like even people that know what they're talking about have a hard time?
Well, we used to think that this group were cats.
Yeah, that
Like
seems to be
they're so
difficult.
similar. We used to think that they were related.
Okay.
And it is partially that I don't, especially with Nimravids, I don't know much of what to look for. But if you were to say, one of these is a cat, one of these is a Nimravid, for me, someone who knows paleontology, it would not quite be a coin flip, but it would be hard.
Gotcha.
And so much so that Nimravids are often called, quote, false saber-toothed cats, because most of them had saber teeth as well. And like I said, they were in North America for about 20 million years before actual cats were. And they were doing basically the same thing that cats do in the environment, particularly the bigger cats, as I think the smallest Nimravid that I was able to find was about lynx size or so like medium-ish dog. So doing all sorts of things in North America. And while they were around in Europe as well, they really exploded in North America, were most of the major predators there during the Oligocene and early Miocene. So, the high 20s of millions of years ago. And this is a really good example of what's called parallel evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when
we've talked about this before, right?
Yeah. So, convergent evolution is when two not very closely related groups come into the same answer. So this would be last episode I mentioned how similar the eyes of vertebrates and the eyes of squids are. Extremely distantly related, basically as distantly related as animals can be, but eyes that are extremely similar. That's convergent. Parallel evolution is when two groups that are like reasonably closely related go down the same path sort of together.
So wait, say that again?
So convergent evolution,
right?
Very distantly related groups coming upon the same or similar answer to things.
Right.
Parallel evolution, two groups that are pretty closely related, sort of going down the same evolutionary road together.
Okay, so in both cases, the animals or the species are doing a similar thing. It's a matter of how closely related they were at the start.
Yeah.
Okay. And I imagine
that's a good way to put it.
I imagine there's a little bit of, like kind of hair splitting and like, a gray area as to whether it's convergent or parallel.
I'm sure that there are cases like that. In just the second or two there of thinking of it, I couldn't think of one that's like you could call it either way.
Right. Okay, but understood. Maybe it's more clear cut than I'm thinking.
Yeah, it really is just like a matter of degree, but it's like I feel like there are just not many good examples of one that is on the border.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so that was this group called the Nimravids. There was also another group that I mentioned earlier called the Barbarophilids, which were also extremely similar to cats and also beat cats to North America. To the point where this group has been bounced around a lot. Some research suggests that they are actually cats. Some suggest that they are Nimravids instead. But the most recent research suggests that they are the sister group of cats, so the most closely related group of all of them, two cats. And this family has also been called false saber-toothed cats because they also looked like cats, and they also had big saber teeth.
Mm-hmm.
So this cat-like shape with saber teeth is a very popular thing to be. in this time period. Saber-toothed cats are not special. But back to the actual cats now. I just wanted to take that quick sort of tangent to be like, yeah, this is a very popular shape to be. It's a very good shape for being a sneaky killer. But yeah, like I said, back to the actual cats with Proailurus, that first cat genus, being kind of all over the world. A new genus in Africa likely evolved from it called Pseudailurus, which means fake red panda, or it should be fake cat. I don't know why it's fake. That's just a term that is used in paleontology with names sometimes. I don't know.
Okay.
And this genus, Pseudailurus, spread out of Africa very quickly and basically took over the world again and basically just went out and replaced Proailurus pretty much everywhere. And because of this, because it was so widespread, it split into many, many, many more groups. Basically all of the other cats. And there are lots of groups that came out of this genus that, there are a handful of species, but and that are pretty well studied, but just for the sake of time, we're not going to go into all of them, but we are going to go into a couple of them. So the first is the subfamily Machaerodontidae, or Machaerodontinae, there it is, which is the actual saber-toothed cats.
These saber-toothed cats, okay.
Yes, not the false ones, the real ones.
Right.
These ones first show up in Africa, but very quickly take the trip through Asia and North America. And these are sort of the most extreme cat-like, like the most cat of the cats.
Okay.
In the sense that they are not good long-distance runners at all. That's much more of like a dog thing. To be like long-distance chase down predators. These take the complete other direction in being the most cat, in that they could not run very long distances at all. They were very heavily built, very stocky, so they had to get really close to their prey in order to catch it.
And so does that make that, I imagine that made it a lot more difficult for them to survive and to catch things.
It depends. There's debated. I don't know how strong the evidence is for like pack hunting or pride hunting like lions do.
Mm-hmm.
It's often suggested in a lot of like media things, but I don't know how strong the actual scientific evidence is for it. But clearly they were doing something right.
Right.
Because some of them were enormous. For example, the most famous genus you'll see of these is called Smilodon. That is like the famous saber-toothed cat. It's the one that's all over the La Brea tar pits. It's the one that was in the movie Ice Age that we did an episode about.
Yes, we did. One of my favorite episodes.
I know, that was a good one. In-person episode.
Yes, that's part of why it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
We were in a small hotel room somewhere in California.
Yep. But yeah, so Smilodon is the very famous one from here in the Americas. And while the genus was in South, Central, and North America, the species Smilodon populator down in South America was probably the largest cat of all time. It was somewhere between 500 and 800 pounds. And there have been some trackways with like the paw prints just being so massive that they think that individual was probably close to like 1,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds?
Yep. And like I said, for a tiger, those top out at like 650.
Jeez.
So at least this individual was just enormous.
Right.
But not all of them were that big, and they all sort of vary in their saber-tooth length. Smilodon is kind of at the one extreme end of the really long ones, but some of them had they're sort of split into two groups. There's the scimitar-toothed cats, which had shorter saber fangs, but they still stuck out of the mouth. And scimitar, if you're not familiar, is like a type of sword. It's like a curved sword.
Okay.
And the ones with longer teeth, and this is one that I had to look up because I wasn't familiar with this type of sword, but apparently it's another type of sword, but it's called the dirk-toothed cats, which are the longer saber-toothed cats like Smilodon.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about the teeth. We're still not entirely sure what the teeth were like used for. Like, obviously they were used in hunting somehow, but
Somehow.
they are really fragile. Like, they could not take much like side to side force, like at all. And just like your teeth, if they break, they don't grow back. So they had to be really careful with how they use them, or they would starve.
I don't like that. I don't like thinking about that.
So it's hard to do like models and simulations on them to figure out how they were using them, because a lot of times the teeth will just break in the models, you know, or like with like computer models. So it's like the stress that they would have to put on them. They must have been just doing something very specific. So what it's kind of thought is that they, you know, if you think of like how a lion hunts, how they will, you know, sort of jump on the back of like a big like water buffalo or something and use the claws to hang onto it and basically drag it down. Lions will also bite while doing that. It's basically thought that these guys would do something like that, but just without the biting. But because they were so big and beefy, they could wrestle, you know, big herbivores to the ground. And then once they sort of had them pinned, then they would just sort of stick the big sharp teeth into their throat. And that, because they are getting stabbed twice in the throat, that would kill, you know, whatever they were hunting pretty safely.
Yep, pretty quickly.
So
there's less of a problem. Okay, I mean, I assume this is just a hypothesis at this point.
Right, and that's something that's, you know, very hard to test.
Right.
But yeah, so that is very briefly the saber-toothed cats. That is just one subfamily. Then we have the two subfamilies that we still have today, the Felinae, most of the cats, and the Pantherainae, the big cats. As I mentioned earlier, the Felinae, which are the smaller ones, don't have a great fossil record. They're pretty small, which means they don't fossilize well. A lot of them live in forests. Forests don't fossilize well. We do have some very notable species, though, such as the American cheetah, the genus Miracinonyx, which lived in the Great Plains of North America during the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, and was doing more or less what cheetahs in Africa do, just being real, real fast.
I mean, cheetahs, you know, that's kind of the one thing everybody can tell you about cheetahs, that they're, what is it, the fastest land mammal?
Fastest land animal, period.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
So that's kind of it. Like, there are a couple fossil species of the smaller cats, but nothing particularly notable. Whereas the pantherines have also a pretty bad fossil record because of the places that they live, but because they are bigger, they do have, you know, decent fossils. So the oldest pantherine fossils are from the species Panthera blythae, and are from the sort of Tibet area, so the Himalayas, like northern Himalayas, around 4 to 6 million years ago. So that's when they sort of split from the small cats. And it's likely that all the big cats evolved in sort of Central Asia, mostly just based on where all of them currently live, because, you know, 4 to 6 million years ago is not that long. So they just haven't had as much time to spread out and diversify all that much. Most of the fossil species of the genus Panthera, which is the same genus as your lions and tigers and jaguars, leopards, stuff like that. Almost all the fossil species are also found in Asia. However, there is Panthera splea, the Eurasian cave lion, which it got to about the size of a tiger, so a bit bigger than modern lions, but ranged all the way through basically the not super mountainy areas of Eurasia, and then even got a bit into North America with some fossils in Alaska and northern Canada. And then once they got to North America, evolved to be Panthera atrox, the North American cave lion, or the American lion as you might hear it called, and basically just took over all of North America during the Ice Age.
Took over what does that mean?
Like, most of North America has fossils of these guys, particularly in like the southern parts. Very famously at the La Brea tar pits, there are like hundreds and hundreds of them from the La Brea tar pits.
Mm-hmm.
And so these guys are very notable because they were about 25% bigger than lions are today. So like a fair bit bigger than a tiger. And they were just casually strolling around North America.
Casually strolling around North America. Okay.
Yeah, which is, not... North America has a big lack of like large predators these days. I think the biggest predators, would, other than like the polar bear, would be bears. But bears even, aren't the biggest predators. They don't eat. They eat a lot more plants than they do meat, realistically. But the largest like exclusive predator is mountain lions, which is pretty unusual. That mountain lions are still not all that large. And then lastly, to round us off here, like with many groups, the largest cats went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, along with things like mammoths, giant ground sloths, and lots of other large mammalian species, for many reasons, most likely a combination of climate change and humans humaning it up all over the world. And if we weren't already over an hour, I would like to have a section talk about domestication of cats because it's a really interesting topic. But we're already on page 5 of my notes, and we can save that for a future episode.
Part 2 coming up.
Or just like a domestication in general, because it's a really interesting thing. Because it is like evolution, sort of. It's like an evolution speedrun. Domestication is.
Yeah, that's something I would like, a domestication episode, just how that happens. You put it on a list.
Absolutely.
And is that it for today?
It sure is.
Well, that has been Cats According to Us, and this has been another episode of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. We will see you guys in 2 weeks, and until then, take care, everybody.